Good evening. Can you hear me back there all right? Okay. I don't have the... Oh, there we go. That ought to be better. All right. Welcome to the Orange County Historical Society. Thank you all for coming tonight. A few orders of business before we get started here. One, if you want to become a member or you need to renew your membership, you can do so. We do have, Aida there in the back is waving at you from the kitchen, can help you out. Or you can also fill out, there's also forms at the book table and the back where the cartels are, or at the check-in table. So you have options. And then also, of course, we have books for sale. We have a few that we don't normally have. I don't know if any of the newer ones are left, but we had a few there that are new faces. And of course, to those of you who are new to the society, they're all new to you. So a few other of our fellow Orange County historical organizations have events coming up. I want to mention Orange Community Historical Society on Wednesday, May 14th, has a public program coming up. And so that is going to be Alan Hess, our old friend, speaking on the subject of the Eichler Tracts of Orange. So, yeah, exactly. That is the 14th at 5:30 p.m. at Orange Public Library at the main branch. So, and we have a whole contingent here from the Orange Community Historical Society, and so you can bend their ears afterward if you're interested in doing so. Also, want to mention, of course, out at Arden, out at Majeska's home, they're having their spring open house on Saturday, May 17th. And that's going to be start at 10 a.m., 10 to 12. So if you are interested in that and you have questions or anything, talk to our wonderful camera operator, Rob Brown, who, by the way, does a fantastic job for us every month in putting together our video programs. So if you've enjoyed those online, that's all Rob. That's all Rob. And then, of course, have to talk about our annual dinner, which is next month, exactly a month from now, June 12th, at the Alta Vista Country Club in Placentia. Historian and Disney Imagineer Christopher Merritt will speak on the subject of designing Disneyland, the imagination of Mark Davis. The evening includes a delightful buffet dinner and our always popular silent auction. Flyers and the latest are in the upcoming and current issues of the Courier, and they're also available on the table there at the entry. So if you want to pick up one of these, you can also sign up using one of these. So you could pay for it tonight, or you could, which honestly saves us a few bucks over processing it over the internet. But whatever is most convenient for you is fine with us. So, with that, I want to introduce our speaker. I don't see him. Anyway, I'm Chris Jepsen. I'm an independent Orange County historian, obviously president of the Orange County Historical Society, and I'm a heritage services professional by day, and I'm also the guy behind the OC History Roundup blog. I've written articles for many publications, including our own Orange Countyana. Since starting out in local history in the late 80s, I've been a docent and a photographer, organized tours and seminars, given more than 100 lectures, developed museum exhibits, and organized nonprofit groups. Along the way, I've had the honor of helping save more than a few historically significant stories, artifacts, and buildings. I'm a Cal State Fullerton grad, but my greatest education came from the 5 years I spent with the daily mentorship as historian Phil Brigandy's assistant. So I blame him for any good I'm doing in all of this. So with that, I will hand it over to our speaker. Let me get some of this out of the way. So I got hooked on this story in early 2022 I got an email forwarded on to me from a German genealogist by the name of Hartmut Verheyen. And I ended up in this conversation with him and Keith Johannes from the Dana Point Historical Society, who was starting to dig into this family story that this guy was trying to track down. Verheyen is doing pretty extensive genealogical work, and he's like, what happened to this shirt-tail relative that ended up, this branch that ended up in the United States back in the 1800s? And so Keith started looking into it, this guy was looking into it, I started looking into it, and then I kept looking and looking and looking, because it really interested me. It really caught my imagination. And so I continued to keep digging right on up into this year, and eventually published an article on this. It's an interesting story I hadn't heard before. It's full of colorful and bizarre characters, and it illustrates that the Wild West did not stop at Arizona or even Calico. It came all the way to the coast, literally. And while this is sort of an Old West version of 48 Hours, it is also a story of a critical era in our history and a town that vanished as quickly as it appeared. There are very few contemporary images available to illustrate this talk with, so you'll see a few repeated ones here. Also, I'm using a few images that are similar, but not the actual thing. But these will be either clearly marked or very obvious, like Mr. Van Cleef here. On May 23rd, 1888, see, told you. On May 23rd, 1888, a strange foursome drove a rented wagon into a tiny beach resort of San Juan-by-the-Sea, now part of Dana Point. They were armed and looking for trouble. They'd left this little village for Santa Ana only a week before, but now ominously returned to settle unfinished business. The group included pharmacy clerk Alfred Rudolph Hugo von Ludinghausen Wolff, generally known as Alfred R. H. Wolff. He was a short, bearded, florid, hook-nosed 29-year-old who'd been busted a year earlier for pretending to be a doctor. Wolff claimed descent from the noble line of Baron von Ludinghausen Wolff of Prussia. He would go by a host of aliases and name variants over the course of his sordid life. With him was his 20-year-old wife, Bertha May Bertha Wolff, who was described in the press as a fat but not unattractive little blonde with a turned-up nose. On this day, Bertha carried her baby, Artie, with her. The final member of the party was Alfred Emanuel Peterson, a tailor in his late 30s and a native of Gothenburg, Sweden. The newspapers described him as tall and wild-looking. Here he is later in life, much cleaned up at that point. Some months earlier, Alfred Wolff had returned to California's Bay Area after a stint at sea aboard the USS Pinta as a pharmacist, only to find Bertha with baby Artie, who had been fathered by Peterson. Driven into a fury, Wolff had shot Peterson, inflicting a light neck wound. But soon all was forgiven, and, as the San Francisco Chronicle put it, Wolff's jealousy of Peterson subsided into a complacence which tolerated the continued presence of the latter as one of the family. Wait, it gets weirder. And so it was, as an unorthodox family, that the four unlikely characters arrived in San Juan-by-the-Sea. There, Alfred Wolff sought out fisherman Frank Wilson in the local saloons and ultimately gunned him down in a particularly horrible way on the steps of the Pioneer Hotel. Now see, now you can leave. Before we get too far into the gory deed itself, the swift response and the details of the Cretans involved, it's best to set the scene by describing the time and place, namely the railroad boom and San Juan-by-the-Sea. So let's talk about the railroads in Orange County and the railroad boom. So The mid-1870s, the Southern Pacific comes to Orange County. Of course, this is groundbreaking. We didn't have anything like this. There were no big, highways crisscrossing the state or the country. There was no, this was our link to the world. The problem was, it was a monopoly. There was only one line, and they acted like a monopoly, and they charged money like a monopoly. So it really wasn't the game changer that it seemed. But the Santa Fe Railroad comes to Orange County in the late 1880s. Now there's competition. Now there are price wars. And transcontinental service really begins, really gets underway. And this is huge. The boom leads to new communities like Fullerton, El Toro, and Buena Park. Exponentially larger markets for local agriculture, which of course is huge to us because prior to World War II, our story is a story of agriculture. That was what fueled our economy and culture and everything else here. It led to a new county of Orange breaking away from Los Angeles. It led to wild land speculation. Prices for land shot through the roof. That in turn led to snazzy tourist hotels like the Palmyra here in Orange, which, all these land speculators coming out to look at property and can possibly buy it, had these fancy places they could come stay while they were, planning whether or not to drop a large pile of money here in our midst. And then it led to a lot of short-lived towns. Like I say, some of them lasted, like Fullerton, but some not so much. San Juan-by-the-Sea was one of Southern California's many short-lived 1880s railroad boom towns. Civil engineer John Kuhlman had moved down to the site to lay out the town of San Juan-by-the-Sea for the Pacific Land Improvement Company, which was really the real estate investment branch of the Santa Fe Railroad. The Santa Fe had high hopes of big real estate sales. Born at the peak of the boom in 1887, the village was located along the tracks near the mouth of San Juan Creek. The first lots went on the market in July 1887. The first trains were advertised to arrive soon after, but heavy rains delayed completion of the line until January. Visitors could rent an elegant tent for $2 a week or $5 a month. In late August 1888, an LA Times correspondent described their recent experience at San Juan-by-the-Sea while on one of the many special excursions offered by the Santa Fe. Quote, "The village consists of about a dozen houses, primarily beach cottages, and between 30 and 40 tents of families camping there for the summer. The Santa Fe has a very neat depot building here, and excursion trains are switched off on a Y on the great sand dike which stretches from bluff to bluff at the mouth of San Juan Creek." Here's a view of the depot at the time. Pretty impressive. And here's that site today. Here the passengers alight from the cars into a large pavilion with a chandelier, which affords ample shade and is a good place to enjoy the pleasure of the dance or a delightful prospect of the sea on one side and the mountains on the other. A band furnishes music here every Sunday. There are 2 restaurants on the beach that sell good lunches and a bathhouse that rents suits to bathers. Opposite the depot is a fairly good family hotel with a livery stable attached. A store of general merchandise, a saloon, and the waterworks of the town are among the other attractions. Last year, the streets were all graded and a big reservoir was built back in the hills. A winding road has been graded up the hillside to the top of the south bluff. A broad mesa slopes down from inland to the sea, breaking off in bold, perpendicular, white-faced bluffs from 100 to 150 feet high. We're all pretty familiar with those. The San Juan Creek, a beautiful, limpid stream, runs to the mesa for about 20 miles in a narrow little valley, from a mile or 2 miles wide the line of bluffs being entirely absent at the mouth of the river. The railroad, or on emerging from the San Juan Valley, runs along the beach between the roaring surf on one hand and the great cliffs on the other. Beside the railroad is a fine carriage drive on the hard sand. The hotel was the small Pioneer Hotel owned by Jonathan H. Sharps, and the aforementioned saloon was housed in a tent which was owned, and I swear I'm not making this up, by Harry Potter. So here's the hotel then, and here's the site of the hotel now. The Pacific Land and Improvement Company had already begun excavation for a much larger and ultimately never built bluff-top hotel, which it promised would, quote, offer a panoramic and bewitching and beautiful grandeur which will excite the wonder and admiration of all Christendom. No sales puffery there. Neighboring Capistrano's most prominent citizen, Judge Richard Egan, who also happened to be the local right-of-way agent for the Santa Fe, tried to encourage San Juan-by-the-Sea to develop into a coastal hub for artists and intellectuals. Although it briefly was a spot where the few society folk of what's now South Orange County came to picnic and attend dances, the village was better described as rough and tumble than high society. Of the much hyphenated development, historian Jim Sleeper wrote, as a special come-on, bullfights were staged each Sunday. Property sales for a single day once hit $30,000. Buyers even went out with lanterns to buy lots at night. Like so many boomtowns, San Juan-by-the-Sea and its fortunes went up like a rocket and came down like a stick. The village fizzled out after the railroad boom went bust in the early months of 1888. A poor water supply only hastened its demise. In 1892, the long derelict Pioneer Hotel saw some activity again when Egan talked his friend, famed actress Helena Modjeska, into renting the abandoned hotel for the entire summer. Modjeska brought her own furniture, grand piano, pets, servants, and entourage of 20 guests with her. Modjeska said, quote, the sympathy between nature in the person of these lovely hills and sweet valley and the glorious air is not equaled elsewhere in California, unquote. When you don't have anything to talk about, you talk about the air and the hills in the distance. San Juan-by-the-Sea continued to be one of Modjeska's favorite spots for beach outings, even as the town disappeared. In 1893, the Pioneer Hotel was moved to Newport Beach, where it operated as Sharp's Hotel until it burned down in 1910. In 1894, San Juan-by-the-Sea's pavilion was removed and its depot burned down in an apparent act of arson. Quote, those who have seen San Juan-by-the-Sea in its palmy days cannot bear to look at it now, wrote Dr. Alexander Rowan in 1894. Wrecks of the hotels, cottages, and once imposing depot are now in ashes and have marred the place beyond recognition. Stupid greed did it. Nothing is left standing but the water tank, the Dutch hall, and an unsightly barn within the limits of the original town site. It looks for all the world like a desert surrounded by 1,000 graveyards. And here you can see in Newport Beach, you're looking off the pier, and there's the dory fishing fleet, we all know. And there, I put the red dot over the Sharp's Hotel. So that's the one they moved all the way down the coast. In 1895, the LA Times noted that, quote, the town came too late for the boom and was recently sold as acreage at a very reasonable price. Aside from natural beauty, the area's only remaining claims to fame were as a popular spot for hobos and lobster fishing. In 1907, the area had been redubbed Serra in honor of Father Junipero Serra, And by 1908, there was just enough of a population scattered across the area to warrant the formation of the Sarah School District. Another attempt to create a town at what had been San Juan-by-the-Sea, called Capistrano Beach, was launched in 1925, but largely failed until oil scion Edward Doheny Jr. began promoting the area in 1928. The spot was renamed Doheny Park in the wake of Doheny's 1931 death, but reverted to Capistrano Beach in the late 1940s. The rail stop there continued to be called Sarah. The area ultimately became part of the city of Dana Point in 1989. Today, all that remains of the original San Juan-by-the-Sea is the railroad right-of-way and a few streets, including Victoria Boulevard, Domingo Ave, and Las Vegas Avenue. Now, with the scene of the crime thoroughly outlined, let's take a look at our suspects and how they ended up there. Repetition. Alfred Wolff was born in Magdeburg, Germany in 1859 to Oscar and Marie Wolff. Sometime after 1862, the family moved to the United States. They may have originally settled in Davenport, Iowa, as Alfred would spend most of his life claiming to be a native of that city. Around 1870, the family moved from Detroit to San Francisco. Alfred's parents and uncle, Fritz Bollmer, later lived on Park Street in nearby Alameda and were reportedly wealthy. Alfred was a sailor by age 17 and later worked as a hospital nurse and a clerk in his father's pharmacy. In 1884, Wolff left Alameda and went to Winnemucca, Nevada to follow his profession as a druggist. It was there that he met teenager Bertha Marie Maas, who was also a native of Germany, born in Perlberg in 1867. According to Alfred, Bertha was stuck on him and pursued him. After courting for 3 weeks, they asked Bertha's uncle, her guardian, for permission to marry. Her uncle refused to allow his underage niece to marry, but the couple visited the county clerk anyway, hoping to find a loophole. The clerk told them that if they gave Bertha's other uncle, Charles Lash, $50, Lash would give them his blessing. They did. He did. And Alfred and Bertha went home to Alameda as man and wife. After returning to Alameda, Alfred Wolff struck up a fast friendship with Alfred Peterson, and they went into business together, robbing graves and selling the bodies to medical schools. They may not have been moral men, but they weren't afraid to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty. Perhaps looking for a more respectable line of work, Alfred Wolff then tried his luck at sea, serving a 15-month stint as doctor's clerk aboard the U.S. Navy's USS Pinta, an iron-hulled screw tug patrolling the seal fisheries of Alaska. When Wolff finally returned, he found Bertha and Peterson were gone, along with most of the household belongings. His wife and best friend had left a Dear John letter for him, explaining, among other things, that while he was at sea, Bertha had given birth to Peterson's child, Carl Arthur Artie Peterson. When I read that letter, Alfred Wolff told the Examiner, I was so mad I wanted to find them and shoot them. But what is the good? If I do, I will be put in prison and be tried and acquitted. It will make too much trouble for me. My father, sister, and friends all tell me I can shoot them any time I see them, and I will be acquitted. Our first inkling of how Alfred rolls. Instead, when Alfred Wolff finally tracked down his wife and Peterson, he forgave them both. Then the three adults, along with baby Artie, formed a rather non-traditional family. Predictably, this arrangement was a rocky one, with repeated instances of Peterson being chased off at gunpoint, only to be welcomed back later. In at least 2 instances, Alfred Wolff was also accused of trying to kill the child, for whom he had no love, although none of the charges ever stuck. The 4 later moved to the logging town of Fort Bragg, California, where outbursts from Alfred Wolff included shooting Peterson in the neck and attempting to kill Bertha, and again, the baby. A lack of witnesses kept him out of prison, but he was literally run out of town by an angry mob with tar and feathers. His family followed him, and together they would soon find their way to San Juan-by-the-Sea. Lucky us. At the end of April 1888, Mr. and Mrs. Wolff, baby Artie and Peterson, arrived in the little beach resort village of San Juan-by-the-Sea from the San Francisco area. More specifically, they came from Mendocino on a steamship headed for San Diego. The ship stopped in Capistrano, now the site of Dana Point Harbor, in Capistrano Bay, which is now the site of Dana Point Harbor, to unload railroad ties. It was there that luckless fisherman Frank Wilson came aboard and told them that they had a better chance of finding a job in San Juan-by-the-Sea than in San Diego. They came ashore at 8 p.m. Wilson offered to let them stay in his little one-room cabin until they could find jobs and their own place to live, and they immediately moved in. Wilson was in his early to mid-30s, a native of Vermont and a heavy drinker. He told Alfred Wolff he could find work in a drugstore, but it turned out there wasn't one. He told Berta that she could find work as a dressmaker, but there were no such opportunities. Wilson set up cloth partitions in his cabin to make his guests feel more comfortable, but he soon found that he had more guests than space. Wilson temporarily moved himself into the Pioneer Hotel, but frequently came back to the cabin for various reasons. Alfred Wolff and Peterson got jobs unloading railroad ties. The Santa Fe was still at work on their new surf line from Santa Ana to Oceanside and was at the time building the portion of the line from San Juan-by-the-Sea toward Oceanside. By his second day on the job, and by the way, that is the line that's still there today that we all know. By the second day on the job, Wolff decided the work was too difficult and he quit. He told Berta they were leaving town. But Wilson convinced the Wolffs to stay, again, claiming that Berta could find work as a dressmaker. By then, Wilson had a new reason to keep his guests in town. He'd become infatuated with Mrs. Wolff. The next day, Wilson drove Berta into San Juan Capistrano in Mr. Sharp's buggy to buy dry goods at the Mendelssohn store. During that excursion, Wilson asked Berta for money for booze and became belligerent when she refused. Later, his attitude shifted, and he began showing Berta unwanted attentions, propositioning her and hugging and kissing her. Some accounts say he assaulted her and made love to her. It's unclear which parts of Wilson's behavior may have been witnessed by others, but Mr. Mendelssohn, a well-known and respected member of the community, went to Judge Bacon and requested a warrant against Wilson. Oddly, the judge refused. That night, when Alfred Wolff heard about Wilson's behavior, he was, again, say it with me, enraged. The confrontation ensued, in which Wolff later alleged Wilson choked him, beat him, threatened him with a knife, and called him a galoot and a son of a bitch. A galoot, my goodness. I'm sorry, folks, I'm sorry. Purportedly, Wilson also told Alfred that Berta wanted a divorce. Then Wilson turned to Berta, expressed his love for her, and said he would send her letters, and told her, "If you ever want to leave your husband, I will help you." She fled the cabin with the baby and went to Santa Ana, where she stayed in a hotel. Meanwhile, Alfred Wolff and Peterson left Wilson's cabin but stayed in town, having found several days of work on a construction site of a new bathhouse. Berta later made a short visit to San Juan-by-the-Sea to plead with her husband to return to Santa Ana with her. The Wolffs and the Petersons all left for Santa Ana together, where Alfred Wolff quickly found a job as a drugstore clerk. But this unorthodox family wasn't done with San Juan-by-the-Sea yet. They returned on May 23rd in a two-horse carriage. Alfred wore a Navy petty officer's uniform. Nominally, they had returned to settle accounts on a freight overcharge with the local station agent, 38-year-old Charles H. Pope, and to collect some of their belongings from Wilson's cabin. In reality, they were searching high and low for Wilson. They made inquiries throughout the area for several hours and checked in all the local saloons asking if anyone had seen him. By noon, they pulled up to Harry Potter's saloon tent. Santa Ana bartender Robert King saw Alfred Wolff and Peterson there. The tent, quote, "The tent is about 300 yards from the pavilion near the beach," said King. "Wilson's cabin is about half a mile from that tent on the opposite side of the pavilion. Peterson was in Potter's tent and spoke about making a suit of clothes for Potter. Wolff was talking to Potter. He said that he had come down to make a settlement with Wilson," unquote. And yes, some of you may recognize that's Adam England down there, member of the society. Around 11 a.m., undoubtedly thinking the coast was clear and thoroughly inebriated, Wilson staggered off the train at the Sarah platform. He asked station agent Charles Pope if he could borrow money but was refused. He sat around on the platform for about an hour and a half before wobbling towards the Pioneer Hotel. He reached the hotel just as the Wolffs and Peterson drove up to the building. He spoke with them briefly in the street before they drove around and hitched their horses in a corral behind the hotel. The Wolffs and Peterson walked back around to the front of the hotel, and this time Alfred Wolff confronted Wilson aggressively. "You have stated that you have twice kissed my wife, unknown to me," said Wolff. Wilson said nothing. Berta and Peterson stood about 20 feet away, watching the confrontation. "You have further stated that you are going to write her letters," Wolff told Wilson. "Yes," replied Wilson lamely, I was going to write to find out about things." Alfred Wolff continued, "You have also stated that you were going to make love to my wife." And as he said this, he glanced over Wilson's shoulder at railroad watchman George E. Thiessen, who had looked up from his newspaper to observe the conversation. Alfred Wolff took one step to the side to put Thiessen out of his line of fire, reached into his hip pocket, pulled out his Smith & Wesson revolver, and aimed it at Wilson. The drunk fisherman turned to run, and Wolff shot him in the back, sending him sprawling onto the hotel's porch. He fell on his right side with his face down and his feet hanging over the edge of the porch. Wolff took several steps towards the porch as Wilson struggled to get up. His second shot also hit Wilson in the back, knocking him flat again. Again, had no photos of this. After the first two shots, fired from 6 to 10 feet away, Wilson was still moving his arms and legs around, and he may have rolled onto his back. The third and fourth shots missed Wilson and went into the porch. Wilson stopped flailing and just kicked a little after the third shot rang out and stopped moving altogether after the fourth. "Take that, you goddamn bastard," Alfred Wolff shouted at Wilson. "That is what you deserve." Wolff then walked past Thiessen, held up his gun, and said something like, "Did you see that, my friend?" To which Thiessen said, "Yes, I believe I did." The killer stalked away. Thiessen and W.B. Van Hooser, a waiter at the hotel and acquaintances of Wilson, rushed over to the dying man. Van Hooser turned Wilson over so as to let the blood drain out of his mouth, he later testified. It was full of blood as he lay on his back and he was strangling. I turned him on his right side to let the blood run out and then on his back when he drew 2 long breaths and died. After the first 2 shots, Station Agent Pope ran to his office and tried to reach the authorities in Santa Ana or San Juan Capistrano by telegraph, to no avail. I think that may be Pope and his family there. Pope then grabbed his Winchester repeating rifle and ran toward the hotel. He intercepted the Wolffs and Peterson as they came back around the hotel in their carriage to make their getaway. By this point, civil engineer John Kuhlman had also run 300 yards from the railroad office and stood with Pope. Pope aimed his rifle at the carriage's passengers and demanded they put up their hands. Alfred Wolff would not. Berta yelled at Pope, "What is it your business? It's none of your funeral. You're no gentleman." Pope told her to shut up, and Alfred Wolff to throw up your hands, you son of a bitch, or I'll raise the top of your head. To drive the point home, Kuhlman pulled out a pistol and fired it into the air several times. Peterson, who was driving the carriage, immediately dropped the reins, jumped down, and put his hands over his head. Kuhlman had him covered. The carriage had stopped mid-turn, and the horses kept slowly turning until the wheels clinched, threatening to tip the vehicle over. At this point, Alfred Wolff put his hands up and surrendered. There was no chance of escape. With one hand holding the rifle to Alfred Wolff's head, Pope used his free hand to remove the pistol from Wolff's pocket. Pope handed off his rifle to a hotel employee and went back to his office. This time, he successfully reached the sheriff's office in Santa Ana via telegraph. Then, along with Mr. Fox, he took the prisoners and their carriage to San Juan Capistrano and handed them over to Constable Edward Weber. On the short trip to San Juan Capistrano, Alfred Wolff made the first of multiple statements to the effect that he did not regret killing Wilson and that his victim had it coming. I killed that man, he said. He made false statements against my wife. Meanwhile, Berta's reaction to being held at gunpoint was to blather incessantly. Among her ceaseless chatter, however, it was noted that she also made no bones about the killing. Wilson got no more than he deserved, she said, and he did right to kill him. Upon their arrival at the town jail, Constable Weber found a small nickel-plated pistol still in Peterson's possession. That night, Santa Ana City Marshal George Inslee drove down to San Juan and collected the prisoners, along with Wilson's body, and escorted them to Santa Ana on the train. There had already been whispers of lynching in San Juan, and he wanted the prisoners kept safe until trial. During the trip to Santa Ana, Wolff said again that he was glad he'd killed Wilson and that he'd been driven to it. And Berta remained a non-stop chatterbox. By the time they arrived in Santa Ana, Pope said he was ready to strike her if she did not pipe down. Even during the pre-trial hearing, Berta called Pope, who appeared as a witness, a litany of vile names until the San Juan Justice of the Peace, Judge J.E. Bacon, threatened to have her gagged if she did not shut up. Meanwhile, Los Angeles County Coroner James M. Meredith held an inquest on Wilson's body in Santa Ana with Dr. C.D. Ball performing the actual autopsy. Wilson was then buried in an unmarked grave in Santa Ana Cemetery. Alfred Wolff was charged with murder and Berta and Peterson as accessories. By the way, this guy had my job at one point. He was our first president of the Orange County Historical Society I think he had the gig for about 12 years. So, good for Dr. Ball. The trial was set for August 1888 in Los Angeles Superior Court, but was delayed and held in October before Judge William P. Gardner and a jury. Lead defense attorney Colonel Guilford Wiley Wells' only real argument was that Wilson was about to draw a knife and attack. Wolff admitted in court to killing Wilson, but said it was self-defense. He and Berta both said that Wilson was reaching for a knife in his pants, but it soon became to light that the knife in question was resting on a shelf in Wilson's cabin at the time of the killing. Meanwhile, the LA press covered the trial closely, with each newspaper giving it 2 or 3 columns a day. The Los Angeles Times ran such even-handed headlines as "Wicked Wolff" and "The Murderer Wolff." Ultimately, Alfred Wolff was found guilty of the reduced charge of manslaughter and was sentenced to 9 years at San Quentin State Prison. Co-defendants Berta Wolff and Alfred Peterson were found not guilty. Yeah. Not until we add the movie doesn't come out until we add the space aliens and the vampires. Stay tuned. Berta divorced Alfred Wolff on June 14, 1889, on the grounds that he was a felon. She seemed very pleased to quickly untie the knot. A week later, she married Peterson. Meanwhile, at San Quentin, Wolff was assigned to duty as a cell tender. According to prison records, he did a satisfactory job, and through good behavior, he was on track to get out of prison after 6 years instead of the full 9. But from the moment he arrived at San Quentin, Wolff refused to take his sentence lying down, and he soon had a plan for a pardon. To pay for the associated lawyer's fees, Wolff's 75-year-old immigrant father, Oscar H. Wolff von Ludinghausen, began stealing money from his employer, the New Zealand Insurance Company of Alameda. When caught and brought up on 20 charges of embezzlement, Oscar stated that he needed the money to help his son. By whatever means, eventually enough money was gathered to pay for the needed legal work. After almost a year at San Quentin, Alfred Wolff applied for a pardon. The petition sent to Governor Robert Waterman from 11 of the trial's jurors claimed that, quote, subsequently acquired knowledge, unquote, would have changed how they'd voted. They now claimed to know that Berta and Peterson had goaded Alfred Wolff, who was, quote, weak-minded, hot-tempered, and of a disposition easily persuaded, unquote, into killing Wilson. The couple's goal had supposedly been to send Alfred Wolff either off to his maker, at Wilson's hand, or to prison, either of which would allow Berta to divorce her husband and marry Peterson. The jurors also said that they would have voted for a manslaughter conviction if they'd known that it would result they wouldn't have voted for a manslaughter conviction if they thought it would result in a sentence as harsh as 9 years in prison. Based on the jurors' petition and the strength of Wolff's good behavior in prison, Judge Gardner himself joined the petition as well. On November 14, 1890, A.M. Armstrong, the San Francisco attorney hired to prepare Wolff's pardon petition, signed a collection of pleas and petitions to the governor's secretary. In his own cover letter, Armstrong stated that Alfred Wolff had largely been convicted on the testimony of Berta Wolff and Alfred Peterson. He also said the jury had stood 8 for acquittal and 4 for conviction, but that the 4 had been swayed by public opinion and popular prejudice against Wolff. He also said that Berta and Peterson had made Alfred Wolff look worse than he was in order to make themselves look less guilty. Alfred Wolff was pardoned by Governor Waterman on December 30th, 1890. The pardon included the following justification. Quote, the entire jury and Judge W.P. Gardner, who presided at the trial, have recommended the pardon on the ground that Wolff was a victim of a conspiracy and was convicted on perjured testimony. And they state that the evidence to substantiate these views has come to light since the conviction, unquote. The business and political connections of Alfred Wolff's uncle, Alameda County pioneer Fritz Boehmer, may have played a role in garnering support for the pardon. Berta and Peterson moved to Ogden, Utah. Their marriage lasted until 1902, when Peterson was granted a divorce from Berta on grounds of desertion. Their child, Artie Peterson, having survived multiple attacks from Alfred Wolff as an infant, died of an accidental electric shock at the age of 11. As she'd hoped to do while in San Juan-by-the-Sea, Berta became a well-known dressmaker in Ogden. In 1904, she married merchant Hugh Freed, who she'd met while traveling in Germany, and who then moved to America to be with her. They were married in Utah by a minister of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Ultimately, the couple moved back to their native Germany. Berta died in Berlin in 1941. Like Berta, Peterson remarried. In July of 1897, he was back in L.A., at least long enough to marry Utah native and fellow Mormon Mary Sorensen, 30 years his junior. They would raise 6 sons in Ogden, where Alfred worked repairing cars in a railroad shop. Peterson died in Ogden in 1922. Predictably, Alfred Wolff's path after his release from prison included a lot more twists and turns. First, he enlisted in the U.S. Army in March 1891. The Indian Wars were in their waning years, and Private Wolff of Battalion L, 5th U.S. Artillery, was initially assigned to Fort Spokane in Washington on the Indian frontier. where the Army policed the Spokane and Colville reservations and acted as a buffer between the native peoples and the growing number of white settlers. In April 1892, Wolff was transferred to the Army's Hospital Corps. It's likely his pharmacy skills were once again put to use. It's unclear if or for how long Wolff remained at Fort Spokane, but his discharge in June 1894 was issued at Fort Sherman in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Like Spokane, Fort Sherman's mission had also been to quell Indian hostilities. But such hostilities were mostly a thing of the past by the time Wolff arrived. Immediately after his discharge, Wolff married Catherine Arnold on July 2nd, 1894. They would have 4 children together. Wolff enlisted in the National Guard and served at the Presidio in San Francisco. He was honorably discharged in 1897. Yeah, it's him again. But Wolff's penchant for bad behavior resurfaced. In October 1898, he got a job as a mailman in Alameda County. In the early days of 1905, he was reprimanded for being abusive and for disrespectful language to people on his mail route. When asked by his supervisors to return paperwork relating to the reprimand, Wolff refused, resulting in a 5-day suspension. But Wolff showed up for work anyway and made a scene when he was turned away. The police were called to resolve the situation, and Wolff was fired for, quote, the good of the service. By late February, he was completely broke. In 1908, Wolff applied for a job as a substitute letter carrier in the San Francisco area. He claimed he'd never worked for the U.S. Postal Service before and was hired. In May of the following year, the jig was up and he was arrested for perjury. At the request of Mrs. Clara von Ludinghausen, Oscar's wife and Alfred Wolff's stepmother, Catherine Wolff began helping care for the home of her stepson from a previous marriage, Louis Graff. Gradually, Catherine came to spend more and more time at Graff's house until she finally deserted her husband entirely. In 1909, Alfred Wolff sued Graff for $10,000 damages for the loss of his wife's affections. Graff denied knowledge of the problem and told the press that Mr. Wolff is afflicted with numerous troubles of a wholly imaginary sort. Wolff did not receive $10,000 and soon found himself divorced again. There were several lawsuits involving custody of the children, but when Catherine died in 1912, a judge determined Wolff was not fit to raise his own children and placed them with guardians. In 1925, at age 66, Alfred Wolff married Adela Darling Durrier, 5 years his junior, at Swartz Creek, Michigan. Yeah, clearly he's what you call a catch. Back in California by 1927, Wolff filed for his military pension as an Army invalid. He became totally deaf in his left ear and somewhat deaf in the right ear. He died April 9, 1930 in Los Angeles, where he lived at the Pacific Branch National Military Home. He is buried in Los Angeles National Cemetery. In the greater scheme of things, the killing of Frank Wilson had no more historical impact or significance than many other murders in the history of Southern California. But the story is worthy of attention for numerous reasons. First, it was one of the only notable incidents to arise in the short-lived San Juan-by-the-Sea, and it sheds light not just on the largely forgotten town, but on the ephemeral railroad boom towns of the 1880s in general. The crime was also remarkable considering its time and place. The entire area, which would become Orange County less than a year later, had only about 15,000 residents, 3 incorporated cities, and no paved roads. The murder was still a major news story. Despite still retaining an air of the Wild West, in 1888, only 270 criminal cases were tried in all of Los Angeles County. Of those, only 13 were for murder, and of those murders, only 4 took place in the region that would become Orange County. The shooting of Frank Wilson was a major story on the West Coast, and newspapers throughout the West covered it. Despite the Orange County area's sleepy reputation at the time, such tales point out that it was hardly immune from the Wild West atmosphere and the rough, eccentric, and often violent elements that inhabited more famous spots like Deadwood, South Dakota, or Tombstone, Arizona in greater numbers. The killing of Wilson and events surrounding it took place just as the railroad boom brought prosperity to the area and immediately before Orange County separated from Los Angeles County. Soon, growing cities, a larger population, and a higher degree of civilization would be brought to bear on the area. There would be a sheriff's department, a jail, and courts located in Santa Ana rather than an additional 30-some miles away down rutted dirt roads in Los Angeles. And unlike the LA authorities, which cared little about the cow country to the south, the Orange County authorities would not tolerate the Wild West. There was an expectation of behavior that came with no longer being in the middle of nowhere. Although reflecting a turning point in history, the story of the murder at San Juan-by-the-Sea also shows that some things never change. Its characters and relationships are reminiscent of the daytime trash TV talk shows over a century later. Violent crime, substance abuse, undiagnosed psychological problems, people living on the fringes of society, and the related community upheaval are still very much with us. And that is my program. Happy to take questions if there are any. Yes, Lisa.
So this whole adventure started when one gentleman from Germany wanted to know, so was he related to Mr. Wolff?
He's related to Mr. Wolff, distantly. But he's just like, well, what happened? I mean, these von Ludinghausen people, they took off for America. We never heard from them again. Just trying to build out a tree. And so I got particularly interested in a couple of them. So, yeah.
More than he really bargained.
Yeah. Oh, he was very happy to find all this stuff out. Yeah, I mean, that sounds weird, I know, but think about, I don't know how widely it's understood. In Germany, the American West they are fascinated by it. If you travel around the American West going to various tourist attractions to see Tombstone, Arizona, or the Grand Canyon, you will hear German everywhere. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, yes, Tom.
Unless I missed it, are there any photos of Berta?
No, I'm happy if anybody turns one up. That would be great. But I spent a few years looking and never did track one down. So afraid not. Dave, you had a question?
Oh, same question. I thought maybe in Utah, as long as she was there and became a famous dressmaker, that somebody there might have a picture of her.
It is possible. I haven't gone to Utah to go looking, but I've been on Ancestry.com, which is almost like going to Utah. So yes.
You keep showing this current location in land. Who owns that land? I mean, it's next to the railroad. Is it just...
So there's a big railroad right-of-way there.
Right-of-way,
I am not sure about the ownership of each parcel of land. Perhaps the railroad is still leasing out parts of it. But I know right now there are landscape supply places and sheet metal working yards and a variety of sort of light industrial uses out that way now. It is it's an interesting area, not what you think about when you think of Dana Point necessarily, but it is there's a lot of colorful stuff out that way. And everybody I dealt with, every time somebody would come out to see what I was shooting pictures of, they were all very pleasant and told me long stories that had nothing to do with what I was looking for, but they were very interested, and they wanted, like everybody, they wanted to know about the history in their own backyard. And I think that's why we're all, here and part of this. So, more questions? Yes.
Is the baby, did he grow up?
Well, like I say, he got to age 11 in Ogden, and then died in an electrical accident. So, yeah, afraid not. We have more questions. Okay.
It's a tail wagging the dog with the railroad. It's not like people were there. This is where the railroad's going to stop, so we're going to try and build around it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, they had that figured out, and you build your you build the rail lines, and you build them between places that you need rail lines, like down to San Diego where there's a port and all of that. And but hey, along the way, and you know, they worked out deals too, where you know the government wanted to encourage the railroads to build, and so well, we'll give you right of way, and then we'll give you a certain amount of land along the way as part of the sweetheart deal, and then you know that gives them, between the land they had acquired that way and then other land around it that they might purchase. You know, they could build whole towns and then sell lots, and of course the railroads coming to town, everybody gets excited and starts buying on speculation, thinking they're going to get rich. And you know, some did well with that, and then some people bought in San Juan-by-the-Sea. So, and a lot of other towns that disappeared almost overnight. Julie.
How many of those towns were there? Do you know for sure?
I don't know off the top of my head. I couldn't tell you. They were scattered all over, you know, everywhere the railroad went. Some survived, some didn't. And we had, there were a number of them, good number of them in Southern California. I'm not coming up with the names off the top of my head.
Well, they're very close to St. James.
That's true. St. James here in Orange. So
The one in Santa Ana, is it the one that's still there?
the
Same
one,
location?
the
one that you
the
have
depot.
pictures of? Yeah, the depot.
Oh, the depot in Santa Ana, it's in the same area generally, but it isn't the same building. And basically they built down the way, and then they tear down the old one. And they went through that a couple times. So it has migrated over time. But it is interesting, if you go down to where the station, the beautiful station is down there now, which was built out in the 80s. But on the other side of the tracks from there is the old, they call it the Fruit Street Yard, and it's the old county yard. And they're in the process, they're about to start clearing all that out and tearing it down. But a lot of those buildings are well over a century old, and they're old, you know, they're old packing plants, they're old cooling plants, and all kinds of things, warehouses for stuff coming off the trains. It's a fascinating area, and it's, I think a lot of it's only standing because the termites are holding hands at this point, but it's some really interesting stuff down there, and it won't last for long, I'm afraid. So, other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much for coming tonight. Hope to see you next month at the annual dinner, and if not, we will see you here in September. Do help yourself to refreshments in the back, and check out our books. And if you're not a member already, we encourage you to sign up. We'd love to have you. Good night.